Even if you don't know the term primary prevention, chances are you participate in it every single day. When you brush your teeth, you are doing so to prevent getting cavities. If you exercise, you are likely trying to prevent becoming overweight. You wear seat belts in cars to protect yourself if you're ever unlucky enough to get into an accident. These are all examples of primary prevention. Definition of prevention. Primary prevention refers to the actions people take that help them avoid developing certain health problems. These problems can include diseases, sicknesses, injuries or conditions that are not beneficial to the body. These actions are the first type of preventive behaviors that are conducted before the problems occur. They not only save people from experiencing illnesses, but help them to save time and money in health care. What are the risk factors? Before primary prevention is carried out, certain information about the person needs to be identified. Risk factors are the traits people possess or the behaviors they choose to practice that increase the chance of them getting a specific condition. Although there are some risk factors a person cannot control, such as their age, gender and family history, there are some behaviors they can control. Let's first look at some risk factors that cannot be controlled. 1. Older adults are at risk of breaking a hip bone when they fall. 2. Men are at a higher risk of getting high blood pressure than women. 3. Daughters of mothers with breast cancer are at risk of getting it too. Now look at some examples of risk factors that can be controlled. 1. Decreased physical activity contributes to the risk of childhood obesity. 2. Unprotected sex practices increase the risks of getting sexual transmitted diseases. 3. People who use tobacco products are at a higher risk of developing certain cancers. Primary prevention strategies can be delivered via various means. Some of these are health care facilities. Health care facilities provide education to patients to increase their knowledge about the possibility of developing conditions. This can be especially important if the patient has a family history of a certain disease. Healthcare professionals give instructions about lifestyle changes in diet and exercise and encourage practicing safe behaviors. Vaccinations are also made available and administered to help people avoid getting certain diseases. Products such as contraceptives and condoms may also be distributed. Workplaces. Some employers offer their workers health benefits that support primary prevention. Some programs provide access to gym memberships that promote fitness and referrals to nutritionists to assist in healthy food choices. Employees are assigned coaches that help identify risk factors and encourage positive behaviors. Employers have also been known to have health fairs and walks that provide information on how to prevent specific diseases. Schools. There are attempts to promote primary prevention behaviors in children and adolescents. Schools are offering more nutritious lunch choices, encouraging longer physical activity time, and decreasing the access of vending machine snacks. They have programs that educate students about drug abuse and safe sex. The media has commercials against drugs and tobacco that specifically target adolescents as well as informative programs about teenage pregnancies. There have also been public campaigns against drinking alcohol and texting while driving. Let us now talk about disease prevention and control. Those of you who have played some first-person shooter games are undoubtedly aware of the many different weapons that may have been at your disposal. For example, you may have used a knife, gun, rifle, machine gun or even a bazooka to obliterate your opponent. Besides those offensive weapons, you may have used defensive techniques as well. By way of wearing protective armor or drinking a health potion to get your health levels back up to 100%. In a similar fashion, humans have many different ways by which we can prevent and control disease, as you'll find out in just a little bit. Before going out to do battle in your virtual game, you'll probably agree with me that you need to put on some kind of armor in order to protect your health. In the real world, the best armor we have to stop a pathogen, which is something that may cause disease and harm your health, is known as a vaccine. A vaccine is a preparation containing part of, or a weakened version of, a pathogen, which improves the immune system's fight against disease. In essence, when you get vaccinated, you get shielded against whatever bacterium or virus was in the vaccine you got. The next time this pathogen hits you like a bullet would hit you in your video game, Your health wouldn't suffer nearly as badly had you not been vaccinated, or shielded against, that pathogen. After donning our armor, we need to select a few weapons to help us fight our deadly enemies. The viruses, fungi, bacteria and parasites that are out to get us. In the armory of the video game, you have a huge selection to choose from. I suggest we choose a wide variety of weapons. Let's take a knife, a flamethrower, and everyone's favorite, a bazooka. Our knife is something that can cut a person and create a wound. If you've ever had a cut, you've probably used something like alcohol, hydrogen peroxide or iodine to clean up your wound. All of these compounds are known as antiseptics, which are agents that kill most of the microbes on living tissue. By using an antiseptic, you help to kill off potentially disease-causing pathogens that were trying to invade your body through a cut. Besides the knife, you'll remember we're packing a flamethrower. The flamethrower we are going to use is specifically designed to kill off any monsters we may encounter in the video game. However, the flamethrower can't get any of the robots in our game since they are made up of metal and are flame resistant. Therefore, the flamethrower is more of a disinfectant as opposed to a sterilant. A disinfectant is something that kills most, but not all, microbes on an inanimate object or surface. While a sterilant is a substance that kills all living microbes on an inanimate object or surface. Therefore, because a sterilant is more powerful than a disinfectant, it is akin to the bazooka we are packing, which can kill everything from the smallest enemy to the toughest robot we may face in our video game. The other reason we really need that bazooka isn't just to kill something, robotic or otherwise. No, we need it for far bigger purposes as well. Our knife and flamethrower are useless against the planes, tanks and choppers bringing our enemies into the battlefield. We must stop the transport vehicles from coming onto the field or we'll never win the battle. The vehicles that transport our enemies, the pathogens that cause disease, are individually known as a vector. In real life, a vector is a living agent that harbors and transmits a pathogen to another living being. For example, a mosquito that drank the blood of a bird infected with a deadly virus will carry that virus in its body. After the mosquito bites a human, it will then transmit the virus to the human as well. That mosquito is like the troop transporter in our game carrying soldiers, the viruses, within it. Once it lands on a human, the battlefield, it will release the viruses to attack us. That's precisely why we must engage in something called vector control, which is a process that eradicates agents of disease transmission, aka vectors. There are many ways by which vector control can occur. For example, we may get rid of stagnant water that is a great breeding ground for mosquitoes. Or we may use chemicals to fumigate an area to kill the mosquitoes. Regardless of how it occurs, vector control is important in a mosquito-borne disease known as yellow fever. In some cases, until a preventative vaccination for the disease can be given. Controlling the mosquito population is of utmost importance to control the spread of disease. Keep in mind one important thing: a vector doesn't have to be just a mosquito or an insect. It can be any arthropod, mammal or bird. In any case, after we kill all the monsters, vectors and robots on the battlefield, you will agree with me that the field will be littered with toxic metal equipment and disgusting, decaying corpses of hideous monsters. All the rotting, disemboweled flesh, feces, urine, blood and toxic metal on the battlefield can seriously harm not only the environment but our own health as well. This is precisely why countries around the world use sanitation to clean up public messes big and small. Sanitation is the process of filtering water, cleaning sewage, neutralizing toxins and engaging in waste collection in order to promote public health. I think you'd agree that just like our morbid battlefield, if garbage, feces, dead animals and toxins flowed through our water pipes and city streets, we'd be all pretty sick, pretty soon. That's not a pretty thought at all. That's exactly why we use sanitation to help prevent and control the spread of disease. Now there are different ways you can get sick. Air, water and food. A mother, insects or sex. All of these things are critical to the survival of our species. All of these things can also kill us. This lesson will explore some of the many ways by which you can get sick directly or indirectly and spread about something that is causing you to feel sick to others. However, like the saying goes, one man's garbage is another man's treasure. The methods of disease transmission we'll cover may get you sick and may even kill you. But you have to realize that these same methods are super critical to the survival of whatever organism it is that you are transmitting. The two overarching ways by which an organism can spread is known as vertically or horizontally. Horizontal disease transmission implies that pathogens are spread to other members of the same or different species through non-hereditary means. For example, the pneumonic plague is spread horizontally when you sneeze. And another person inhales the aerosolized bacteria particles expelled during the sneeze itself. However, other pathogens or genetic conditions can be spread by way of vertical disease transmission, which means it is spread from parent to offspring genetically or by way of passing an infection from mother to child. This could happen when contaminated breast milk infects an infant or when a transplacental infection, as with HIV, occurs in the womb. That's why I said in the beginning of this lesson that your mother can, in a way, end up killing you inadvertently. Further still, some other ways by which diseases can be transmitted are more indirect. For example, you could get sick due to a vector-borne disease. A vector is any organism that carries and transmits an infectious agent into another organism. A really famous example of a vector is a mosquito. You can get all sorts of stuff from mosquitoes, from bumps and rashes to malaria and West Nile virus. Vectors aren't limited to mosquitoes, however, as ticks, flies. And even people can technically be considered a vector of disease transmission. If it's alive and it transmits a disease to you, it's a vector. However, if it's not alive and transmits a disease to you, it's known as a fomite. Again, a fomite is a non-living object that transmits disease-causing pathogens. A very well-known example of this is something like a sponge you use to wash your dishes with. It's a great place for pathogens to hide in and spread. Other examples include pencils, handkerchiefs and so on. Finally, a very specific form of a fomite, known as a vehicle, exists as well. No, this isn't your car. A vehicle, in the context of this lesson, is a fomite such as food or water. When you eat a vehicle, such as a hamburger that is laced with stomach flu-inducing viruses, you'll know exactly what I mean when you can't get off of your throne. Besides what I already mentioned, there are many more ways to get a disease-causing pathogen. Transmission through direct contact. When you directly touch a human with any part of your body, such as through kissing, holding hands, sex and so on, can cause you to fall ill. Transmission through indirect contact. When you don't have any direct human-to-human contact, such as through a cough, a vector or fomite, can get you sick as well. Even iatrogenic transmission, when you get sick due to a medical procedure, such as a blood transfusion contaminated with viruses, can occur. Literally any way you can possibly think of can be used by a pathogen to get you sick. Unless you live in a bubble, you're never safe. What is our foodborne illnesses? A foodborne illness is any illness that results from consuming food contaminated with pathogenic microorganisms or toxic compounds released by microorganisms. The disease-causing microorganisms are most often bacteria, but can also include fungi, viruses and protozoa. Your food usually travels a long distance from its origin before it gets to your plate. It can be handled by many different people and exposed to many different conditions. This results in many potential points where food can become contaminated. Some microbes responsible for foodborne illnesses are members of the normal microflora of the food organism. So, for example, the bacteria that are naturally found in the cow intestinal tract can end up contaminating the slabs of beef during butchering. This kind of contamination can occur during slaughter or during any point in the food's processing. Vegetables and fruits are not immune to contamination with foodborne pathogens, despite the fact that they are picked, not slaughtered. Irrigation water or fertilizers sprayed on crops can be contaminated with animal or human waste containing foodborne pathogens. Contamination that occurs early in the food production process has the potential to make many people sick over a wide geographic area after foods are distributed. A vehicle is a non-living source of pathogens that infects large numbers of individuals. In 2012, 5 states in the northeastern United States had an outbreak of E. coli that caused illness in 33 people. In this case, the outbreak was traced to a contaminated batch of prepackaged leafy greens. The leafy greens were the vehicle that delivered the E. coli to the public, hitting several states due to the widely distributed food. More often, foodborne illnesses are a result of a more local contamination. The person preparing or serving the food is the source of the microbes, usually by the fecal-oral route. Poor personal hygiene, insufficient cleaning of preparation surfaces and reusing utensils before and after cooking are common ways that food becomes contaminated with pathogenic bacteria. Insufficient cooking time or temperature can allow any pathogens already present to survive. And failure to promptly refrigerate leftovers can allow these organisms to grow and reproduce. This mode of contamination usually results in foodborne illness that impacts only the limited few that consume the food around the same time and from the same infection source. There are two general types of foodborne illness: food poisoning and food infection. Let's take a minute and look at each individually. 1. Food poisoning, also called food intoxication, is any illness caused by ingesting food containing preformed microbial toxins. The microbes don't need to be alive or actively growing at the time of consumption. They form the toxins and release them directly into the food. The toxins generally cause symptoms immediately, only taking around 1 to 6 hours to develop. The time to develop symptoms can vary depending on the kind of toxin and its concentration in the food. If that jar of green beans that your grandmother canned for you last fall was contaminated with C. botulinum, it is probably now full of both green beans and botulism toxin. Opening the jar introduces oxygen, which stops C. botulinum from growing, but does not impact the toxins already in the jar. If you eat the beans without cooking them, you are eating botulism toxin, which can cause a potentially fatal paralysis. You also ate the Clostridium bacteria, but they are unable to continue growing, making them harmless to you. The paralysis is a result of the toxin alone, not the C. botulinum cells. It is important to note, cooking the food before eating it will inactivate the toxins, making those green beans safe to eat. Food infection is any illness caused by an active microbial infection resulting from ingestion of a pathogen containing food. In this case, symptoms are a result of the growth of viable microbes inside your body, combined with any toxins produced by those microbes. Since the microbes are actively growing, it can take longer for symptoms to develop. It can take anywhere from 6 hours to 3 weeks before the microbial populations are large enough to cause disease. Let's look at one common bacterial food infection culprit: Salmonella. Let's say the cook in your favorite restaurant uses the same knife to slice your grilled chicken sandwich that he used to fillet the raw chicken breast. The salmonella on the knife ended up on your entree, and then eventually in your mouth. After ingestion, these bacteria adhere to the intestinal walls and begin growing and dividing. This causes irritation, inflammation and tissue destruction. There is a lag time before the symptoms develop, as the population of Salmonella grows large enough for the total inflammation to begin causing symptoms. Some Salmonella cells die, releasing a toxin that causes further inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract. Both of these situations lead to fever, nausea, cramping and diarrhea. In this case, the combination of the live bacteria and the toxin released by the dying bacteria are responsible for your symptoms. Let us now talk about health screening and early detection. Health professionals continue to seek ways to decrease morbidity, rate of illness, and mortality, rate of death due to illness, to reduce the strain of disease on our healthcare system and to enable people to live longer and healthier lives. Even though individuals can live well into their 70s and 80s in countries around the world, many individuals experience one or several complex illnesses during the course of their lives. Methods of health screening and early detection are primary prevention strategies that can be taught by healthcare professionals to allow individuals to self-monitor their health in between doctor's appointments and regularly scheduled checkups. With the use of health screening, people may be able to identify disease in the absence of bothersome symptoms, despite feeling healthy. The last topic in this lesson will be about vaccines and antibiotics. Another breakthrough in medicine that has contributed to the rise in life expectancy over the last 160 years is the widespread use of vaccines. Vaccines are non-disease-causing variants, or derivatives of pathogens, that are used to create immunological memory against the pathogens themselves. Strangely enough, the first successful vaccination to be tested against a challenge with a pathogen was performed in 1796 by Edward Jenner. More than 60 years before the germ theory of disease was widely accepted by the scientific community. It had been observed that milkmaids did not often contract smallpox, which was in sharp contrast to an estimated 60% of the general population that contracted the disease. However, almost all milkmaids did contract a related, but non-lethal disease, called cowpox, from the udders of the cows that they milked. It was postulated that contracting cowpox made a person resistant to smallpox infection. So Jenner took it upon himself to test this hypothesis. He took pus from the cowpox blisters of a milkmaid and inoculated a young boy with it. The inoculation produced a mild fever and some short-lived discomfort in the boy, but no other signs of infection. 2.5 weeks later, Jenner injected the boy with smallpox material. And the boy remained healthy. Jenner repeated the smallpox challenge 20 times. And the boy never showed any signs of smallpox infection. Jenner then successfully repeated his experiment on 23 additional people. Jenner's findings were published and quickly spread among physicians in Europe and America. By 1801, physicians all across Europe and even a few in North America started to use Jenner's vaccination procedure. Increased use of the vaccine and a concerted effort by the World Health Organization more than a century later to rid the world of smallpox through vaccination resulted in complete eradication of smallpox by 1977. Let us now learn the different types of vaccines. The smallpox vaccine is an example of a live vaccine, which uses live, infectious virus as the actual vaccine. Live vaccines are usually just weaker, less dangerous forms of the disease-causing virus. These so-called live, attenuated vaccines are created in the laboratory under conditions that promote less harmful characteristics of a virus. In the case of the smallpox vaccine, nature provided a much less dangerous alternative, which could still impart immunity to smallpox. A rather fortunate coincidence for humankind and modern medicine, especially given how deadly and infectious smallpox was. Some vaccines called inactivated vaccines are created by killing or inactivating the pathogen and then using it as the vaccine itself. An example is the pertussis vaccine that protects against whooping cough. Inactivated vaccines are easier to create than live, attenuated vaccines and don't carry the risk of mutating back into a disease-causing form. However, because this type of vaccine isn't active and therefore doesn't infect the body's cells, the immune response that it produces is not as strong as an immune response to a virus that is actively infecting cells. The resulting immunity is also not as strong and fades more quickly over time because fewer memory cells are produced. Therefore, inactivated vaccines must be administered more than once, sometimes 3 or more times to create a strong enough immunity to the infectious agent. Each injection of the vaccine after the initial injection is called a booster shot. And with each additional shot, more memory cells are produced and the body's immunity is strengthened. In certain types of bacterial infections, the disease is caused by a toxin produced by the organism. In most of these situations, it has been found that the toxin can be inactivated with formalin and used as a toxoid vaccine. An example is the tetanus vaccine. An immune system primed against a toxin will be able to identify and destroy the toxin before it can do too much harm, especially if booster shots are given. Recombinant subunit vaccines are vaccines that use recombinant DNA technology to produce high quantities of antigens that elicit an immune response. With the rapid advances in recombinant DNA technology, these types of vaccines have become easy to create and produce. The real challenge with these vaccines is finding the antigens that will produce an immune response strong enough to create immunity. A recombinant subunit vaccine for hepatitis B is now commercially available. And finally, DNA vaccines hold lots of promise. There aren't any approved DNA vaccines on the market yet, but DNA has the potential to combine the best attributes of other vaccines. DNA is easy to produce, manipulate, transport, store and administer. In addition, if the DNA is incorporated into the genomes of some of the body's cells, it could mimic a viral infection without having the danger of introducing a virus that could revert back to a dangerous form. What are antibiotics? In 1928, bacteriologist Alexander Fleming made one of the most important discoveries in modern medicine while cleaning up some old bacterial cultures. On a plate of Staphylococcus aureus, a contaminating colony of mold was growing on the plate. Fleming was going to clean out the dish with Lysol, but before he did, he noticed something strange about the plate. There was a ring around the mold where no bacteria were growing. Being a keen observer and a bacteriologist who was looking for a human-safe drug that could combat bacteria, Fleming recognized the potential in this contaminating mold for an antibacterial agent. The mold was identified as a penicillium mold, so he named the antibacterial agent that it produced penicillin, even though he wasn't able to isolate it himself. Not to worry, though, because other scientists eventually purified penicillin, developed methods to mass produce it, and figured out how to use it to combat many types of bacterial infections, including Staphylococcus aureus, diphtheria, gangrene, pneumonia, syphilis and tuberculosis. Penicillin was the first discovered antibiotic or substance with antimicrobial properties that can be tolerated by humans that was effective against bacteria. Antibiotics are fundamentally different from vaccines because they do not stimulate the immune system. Instead, they directly kill or inhibit the growth of microorganisms. The first major application of penicillin was in the mid-1940s by Allied forces to treat life-threatening bacterial infections of Allied soldiers, and is credited with saving hundreds of thousands of lives during the war. Penicillin was extremely effective against many types of bacteria, but there were lots of diseases that it was not effective against as well. Soon other molecules were discovered that had antimicrobial properties as well, each with a different set of diseases that they could combat. Some were more effective than others, and some had undesirable side effects in patients. The earliest antibiotics, like penicillin, were molecules isolated from natural sources, like molds and plants. However, as chemical techniques became more advanced, chemists started altering these molecules and formed new forms of antibiotics. Eventually, chemists started making completely synthetic molecules and tested them by the thousands for antimicrobial properties. Today, there are over 100 known antibiotics, each with their own characteristics and microbial targets. And even as we speak, drug companies are still working to develop new types of antibiotics.